Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar. I would like to introduce Angela Conover from the Partnership for a Drug-Free New Jersey. Angela.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this morning's Knock Out Opioid Abuse webinar, COVID-19 pandemic and the trauma impacting our children. Today's webinar is brought to you by the Partnership for a Drug-Free New Jersey and the Horizon Foundation for New Jersey, along with our collaborating partner, Hope Sheds Light. Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey, through its philanthropic arm, the Horizon Foundation for New Jersey, has been collaborating with PDFNJ on a 2-year Knock Out Opioid Abuse initiative to address the opioid epidemic through community outreach, prescriber education, parent education, and a statewide awareness campaign. In light of the current pandemic, this initiative has expanded its offerings to include this webinar series. And this is the 3rd webinar in that series. And the goal is to help continue that conversation about the opiate crisis as we all continue to navigate this very difficult time. To deliver some opening remarks on behalf of Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey, I'd like to introduce Philomena McLetter, a Senior Program Officer with the Horizon Foundation for New Jersey. Good morning, Philomena.
Thank you, Angela, and good morning, everyone. I would like to thank all of you for your interest and attendance today. I know that this is a very challenging time for everyone, and we greatly appreciate your dedication to continue the discussion on how we can knock out opioid abuse in New Jersey. As many of you are aware, due to COVID-19, the Partnership for Drug-Free New Jersey has postponed all the in-person spring town hall events until the fall. And as a result, Horizon has been working with the partnership to develop ways to continue the conversation and the community engagement through social media and through the partnership's website. And the partnership team has also quickly adapted by planning this great webinar series. Horizon, through its philanthropic arm, the Horizon Foundation for New Jersey, which I represent, is extremely proud of our collaboration with the partnership and for bringing you today's webinar through our Knock Out Opioid Abuse initiative. This initiative is part of our company-wide response to address and help end this public health crisis across our state. And this initiative also represents a large portion of the Foundation's $1.3 million that we have invested so far to provide support for opioid prevention and education. In closing, I want to thank Pam and Stephanie for joining us today, and to the Partnership for Drug-Free New Jersey's team for developing this webinar series. Together, we can all make a positive difference in combating this epidemic. Thank you, and I will now turn it back to you, Angela.
Thanks so much, Philomena, and thanks to the Horizon Foundation for their continuing efforts to address the issue of the opioid crisis. Now I want to welcome from Hope Sheds Light, the Executive Director, Pam Capacci, who is collaborating with us today to bring the content of this webinar to you. So pleased to have Pam and Hope Sheds Light collaborating with us. We've done a number of activities together, and I'm really pleased and always thrilled to work with you guys.
Good morning. Thank you, Angela. I do first want to start just by thanking the Partnership for Drug-Free New Jersey and Horizon Foundation for New Jersey for continuing the opioid and knockout opioid abuse series, especially now. We really need to remind everyone that we are still battling an opioid epidemic within this pandemic. And I appreciate the opportunity, and we are honored to be partnering with you and to bring this topic in particular to the families that we serve across the state, to remind everyone that addiction impacts the entire family. Hope Sheds Light's mission is to raise awareness and educate individuals and families and the community about the impact of addiction on the entire family. We do this by having the courage to share our personal stories, experiences, to offer strength and wisdom and resources that lead to hope and the knowledge that recovery is real and possible for everyone. And in this webinar, it's our honor really to be providing this resource to so many families who are now either in recovery themselves and home with their children and really needing to manage their own recovery process while also supporting their children through this. We work with families who have lost loved ones to addiction, and through our grief and bereavement support group, we're also experiencing a lot of, receiving a lot of information about their experiences and increased, stress and trauma through this situation. So the topic couldn't be more relevant and needed at this time. So thank you for allowing us to be a part of this and to bringing this resource to our community. Back to you.
Thanks so much, Pam. So we're about to get started. Before I introduce our panelists, I just want to let you know that we'll be taking all of the questions that you submit using the webinar chat feature at the end of the presentation. So as I mentioned, today's webinar is the third in this series, and we're happy to have with us Stephanie Iannelli, who is a licensed clinical social worker from Live Well Counseling, to lead today's discussion. This is a really important topic, so I thank you, Stephanie, for sharing your expertise with us, and I will now turn things over to you.
Sure. Good morning. I'm going to get my thank yous in to everyone who's made it possible for us all to be here today. And I want to send a special thank you out to all the attendees for being proactive and educating yourselves on this topic. Again, my name is Stephanie Iannelli, and I've been working in mental health for over 10 years. I started my career at a large community mental health agency in Ocean County, holding different positions within residential and outpatient settings. Prior to starting my second career in social work, my husband and I were foster parents and eventually adopted our 2 sons, who both have been exposed to trauma. In 2017, I opened my private practice in Toms River and became certified in brain spotting. In 2007, I rely heavily on this therapy, the brain spotting, for an approach to help adults, adolescents, and families heal from their own traumas. So let's get started. Today, we're going to talk about COVID-19 and how the current environment can negatively impact our children. Next slide. I think I can speak for all of us when I say we've been affected in some way or another by the current pandemic named COVID-19 or the coronavirus. I want to address the importance of remaining mindful in that each of us will react differently to events around us, even if we've had the same experiences. Some of us have been diagnosed with the virus, others have family or friends being diagnosed, and others don't even know anyone that's contracted the disease. The way we work and go to school have changed. Some groups continue to work full-time on the front lines or at home. Others have been forced to part-time work or unemployment. Our schools have been closed, leaving parents and some children in charge of their own education and in charge of, some children are in charge of education and entertainment. Some of our households look the same, with people coming and going as they always have. And other households look very different in that every family member is home interacting 24 hours a day. Sadly, even more are now isolated with no social interaction day after day. Mental health providers like myself typically look at daily functioning as a means of measuring clients' distress. Distress also presents differently in each individual. Some children can show no outward signs and appear to be doing just fine. Others often display signs of depression that could include feeling down, losing interest in previously enjoyed activities, trouble with sleep, feeling tired, lack of motivation, disturbances in appetite, trouble concentrating, restlessness or sluggishness, and thoughts that they would be better off dead. Depression and anxiety symptoms sometimes occur together, and anxiety is demonstrated by nervousness, uncontrollable worry about a lot of different things, trouble relaxing, restlessness again, irritability, and fear that something awful is going to happen. Acute stress is more severe and the greatest predictor of developing PTSD at a later date. These symptoms include involuntary thoughts and dreams about a traumatic experience, depressed mood, avoidant behaviors, sleep disturbances, mood swings with irritability, and anxiety in children when separated from their caregivers. So when interacting with others and discussing how we've each been impacted, a lot of us will have the tendency to say, yeah, I know how you feel because I'm in the same boat. Sometimes we assume that having the same experience means having similar emotions. As parents or adults dealing with children, we often use our own emotions in childhood as a frame of reference for how the children in front of us might be feeling. This sometimes could not be further from the truth, especially with today's youth. Our adult brains are organically different than the brains of children, and they're different developmentally and in life experience. Next slide, please. Next, I want to talk about what existential trauma is and why we're viewing this time now as traumatic. Pierre Genet was a French psychologist a long time ago who published the first scientific documentation on traumatic stress. He defined trauma as an experience that overwhelms a person's coping mechanisms. According to the Webster's Dictionary, the word existential is an adjective defined as human experience. So my definition of existential trauma would be an event that hijacks the brain and changes your reactions to daily life. So the brain's most important job is to keep us safe and alive. Organically, it just knows how to receive and process information in order to demonstrate adaptive behaviors in all different kinds of circumstances. Just like we breathe without telling ourselves to breathe, our brain takes care of that on its own. In dangerous scenarios, children will manage the situation by taking cues from their caregivers. As long as caregivers are calm and attentive to their needs, most children are able to be resilient and recover from the traumatic experience. Once to safety, that child's brain will stop producing stress hormones needed for that fight or flight response, and they will have time to make sense of what's happening and adapt accordingly. On the other hand, another child is exposed to the same traumatic event, and the situation can overwhelm that child's brain's processing and cause fragments of the trauma to remain frozen. This means that that child will continue to live life organizing his or her experiences as if that trauma was still going on. The brain will inappropriately trigger the alarm, the nervous system will kick in, and it'll send signals of danger when no threat exists. And this can happen at any time in daily life. When the body goes into fight or flight, the cognitive brain shuts down and the behaviors are on autopilot. Next slide, please. How do we know if COVID is having a traumatic effect on our children? So there are lots of factors that contribute to the way a child's brain will process their experiences. The first one I'd like to address is attachment style. Attachment is developed within a child's first 2 years and remains pretty consistent throughout life without therapeutic intervention. A secure attachment is typically developed when at least one caregiver is attentive to the infant's needs, which leaves the baby feeling safe even when they're in emotional distress. When a baby does not have an attuned caregiver, they will develop one of 3 other types of attachments, which will make it difficult for them to trust the world and the people in it. Given the current situation, these types of children with an insecure attachment will often struggle to manage emotions and their behaviors. It's been said that symptoms of acute stress are the subconscious's response to threat when there's not a consistent support system. So notice when I'm talking about the support system, I didn't say constant, just consistent. We don't need to be with our children all of the time for them to feel safe. The key is for them to feel supported when they don't feel safe. This being said, children without secure attachments are going to be more likely susceptible to experience this time as a traumatic event, and therefore will require more consistent check-ins and need more validation. So specifically asking them about their thoughts and feelings about what's going on. Once they provide that to you, validate those feelings as real while discussing any factual information that might dispute any irrational fears that they talk about. So something like, you know, I understand why you're afraid that you'll get sick because there's lots of people who've really gotten sick. That's why we're staying at home, washing our hands and wearing masks so that we are protecting ourselves. Encouraging them to reach out again whenever they're feeling that way, feeling concerned. And the crucial part is here to make sure that you do when they do. I know that we're all extremely busy outside of the homes or inside the home, and we're having our own emotional struggles and thoughts and fears around what's going on. It doesn't have to be an hour-long conversation. It can sometimes take just a few minutes. But by doing this and taking the time, you'll continue to support a securely attached child. And for that unsecurely attached child, you will be helping to heal the environment of safety that was previously ruptured. Personality also plays a part in how children manage emotions and cope with life experiences. We want to respect the child's personality as this has served them through their life. If we like to talk things through, get in there and hash it all out, that doesn't always mean our children like to deal with things that way, and vice versa. So checking in at various times creates an open environment so that when they do want to talk, they feel comfortable in knowing that we are interested. It's true that talking about our emotions is healthy, but to revisit them over and over again incites worry and anxiety. If your child constantly wants to talk about the fears of the pandemic, try to keep the conversation productive. Again, validate their feelings as real, but encourage the discussion of coping strategies as well. Something along the lines of, lots of people are upset about this, so let's try to brainstorm about what you can do to make the situation more tolerable. Another strategy would be to ask him or her about how they're feeling after they talk about the pandemic, talk about the virus. If they're like most of the kids I see, they'll typically say, yeah, I feel a lot more anxious. So then you might ask if talking about it is likely increasing their discomfort. And if they agree, gently suggest limiting the time that they're discussing it. So without saying, just kind of stop talking about it, you can say, hey, would it be helpful maybe if I noticed that you're talking about it, if I reminded you, hey, you're talking about it again, check in where that anxiety is. Next, current life experiences are also having to do with how the brain is functioning these traumatic times. If we go back to Janae's definition, you'll remember trauma as having to do with overwhelming the brain's coping mechanisms. Likely, your children are dealing with other stressful life events besides the coronavirus, like a romantic breakup, college decisions, their senior year of high school not being what they envisioned it to be, ending friendships, conflict within the home, or even a loss of loved ones. Any one of these could have been the final straw in creating the perfect storm to overwhelm the brain. And if that's the case, COVID-19 could possibly be stored in their brain as a traumatic experience. Predisposition for mental illness and/or substance abuse. If there's mental illness or substance abuse within a child's family, unfortunately, he or she is statistically more likely to develop mental health symptoms upon dealing with adversities like we are now. Childhood experiences also impacts the brain significantly in its ability to process information without relating back to those previous experiences. In clinical practice, we often use the Adverse Childhood Experience Scale, named or referred to often as just the ACE, to measure these types of risks. Excuse me. That scale asks graphic questions about experiences prior to a child's 18th birthday, and each positive answer is scored as 1. The questions read like this. Do you often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought that you were important or special? Did you feel your family didn't look out for one another, feel close to each other, or support one another? Did you often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, or had no one to protect you? Were your parents too drunk or high to take care of you or take you to the doctor if you needed it? Were your parents ever separated or divorced? Did you live with anybody who was a problem drinker or alcoholic or used street drugs? Was a household member depressed, mentally ill, or attempt suicide? So the remaining questions ask about domestic violence, verbal, physical, sexual abuse, and/or neglect. The CDC came up with this schedule in 1998 as an attempt to explain a person's risk for chronic disease, and it actually ended up rating childhood toxic stress. As it increases, so does the risk of disease, as well as social and emotional problems. And the researchers noted that a score higher than 4 was cause for serious concern. The study used to come up with the scale consists of 17,000 people, and almost 2/3 of the participants scored at least 1. 87% of those scored 2 or higher, and the average was 3.5. If you're thinking those numbers are probably related to inner city, lower income populations, let's look a little deeper. The majority of the study participants were white, middle and upper middle class, college educated, people who lived in San Diego with good jobs and great healthcare. Trauma happens more than we like to admit and in areas that we're not always suspecting. And many of us minimize the effect of these trauma types of experiences. I can't say how many times I've been doing an intake or getting some background information and the client says, no big deal. That's just kind of the way it was. My goal today is to heighten the awareness of the negative impacts of these life experiences and hopefully prepare you to better identify underlying conditions that may increase the need for outside help. Pam, I know Hope Sheds Light has been super busy dealing with some of these same things. Could you share some information on what you all are seeing?
Thank you, Stephanie. And I forgot in the beginning to just thank you for dedicating your time today and sharing your expertise to bring this very important message. I really appreciate everything you do for our community and the work that we do together. Hope Sheds Light, I believe I mentioned it, we're a peer-to-peer organization, meaning that what we bring to our audience is our lived experience. We share our experience, our strength, and our hope. And you know, as such, we are a really trusted entity in the community. We have families that will reach out to us first with assistance in looking for assistance to understand the system, navigate it, and learn how to trust it. So we, you know, quickly converted our programming to a virtual platform like so many other organizations so that we could continue to serve. And in doing that and providing the peer-to-peer services, we've had the opportunity to interact one-on-one and group many times throughout the week with families. Some of the families are individuals who are in recovery, some have children in recovery, and what they're sharing mainly is this overall, you know, sense of loss is how we're identifying it. There are children who are in various stages of denial, you know, or anger, the different stages of grief that you can experience when you're losing things like your graduation or access to your friends, the ability to go out. Other children and family members are depressed or having a really hard time managing the anxiety. All of this can predispose or, you know, can place people with substance use disorder at a greater risk for relapse and add an additional, you know, element of stress or trauma to the home. So I really wanted to just mention that there's a lot of material out there related to the stages of grief and kind of validating for your kids that, and yourself, that your recovery program and process is so important now. You may be experiencing additional losses or grief, and try to identify, you know, where you are in that process or where your child might be in that process, and understand that it's not a linear process. You can go back and forth through the various stages, so might your children or your other family members. But there are a lot of strategies that can help you once you've identified it, just in your day-to-day, understand someone might wake up just completely back in denial. Like, I still can't believe I'm not gonna have a graduation, especially now. And you may have thought, I thought we worked through this already. So understand that it's not a linear process and that you can go back and forth through the phases, and that there's a ton of resources online that can help you and your child navigate these overwhelming feelings of loss and grief. And just as individuals with a substance use disorder may be at greater risk right now for relapse or, falling back into an active stage of their addiction, or creating a home environment that has a little more elevated levels of stress and anxiety. People in recovery are also equipped with skills that I think are so handy right now. And I think we have an advantage to a certain degree. And we do like to instill hope. So I would like to remind everybody of a few expressions that we use in recovery that may be helpful for you right now. One of them is keep your head where your feet are. That's an expression that really relates to remaining in the present, and learn how to deal with life's difficulties as they arise. And that is something that would be very helpful for you and your children, to remind them to stay in the present moment. Try not to project to the future and the catastrophe or catastrophizing. There are some activities you can do together, meditation, deep breathing, and other mindfulness exercises that can help you and give you something to do with your child. Service work really helps transform your pain. So accepting that you're part of a collective community of people experiencing this right now, and identifying ways to contribute can be very, very powerful in helping the whole family move through this experience. And just to remind everybody that serenity is not freedom from the storm, but it's peace amid the storm. So, learning that we want to exist alongside of COVID-19 is really a switch in language and a shift that might be very helpful to help you move through these stages. So rather than language that might keep you stuck waiting for this to end or waiting for the shoe to drop, you can start to use language that's, how do we live within this? How do we live alongside of this situation? And it opens up opportunity to find what David Kessler refers to as the 6th stage of grief, which is finding meaning. And I encourage people to look for the meaning that exists and the opportunities that exist through this situation, and flip the narrative. Look for a positive, meaningful way to define and describe and live alongside of this pandemic. I just really thank you for the opportunity to share that, because that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of anxiety, a lot of triggers about loss and grief. And I appreciate the opportunity to share that experience and share that information with you today.
Thanks, Pam. That sounds really similar, as I suspected, to some of the things that I'm seeing in practice.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really grateful to have agencies like yours to refer clients for support outside the therapy setting. Attending therapy can be a really difficult journey, especially when traumatic experiences are ongoing, as is the case with coronavirus. I recently viewed a webinar presented by Mario Salvatore, a fellow brain spotting clinician, who compared the impact of the current trauma as similar to the terrorist attacks of 9/11. He clarified the significant difference with the COVID attack, stating, "It's as if the planes are continuing to fly into the buildings on a daily basis. Our exposure to this existential trauma is ongoing." And my interpretation of his comments is that our brains have not had the opportunity to get to a safe place with time to make sense of what has happened and then adapt our behaviors accordingly. So I'm going to go to the next slide, please. Since the beginning of all of this, the medical doctors have been out there warning us about who is at greater risk for catching the virus. I wish they would have also told us about who is at higher risk for mental health issues during this virus. Because children's emotions and emotional reactions are not always congruent with the presenting situation, it can be difficult to determine how they're truly impacted by the current events. It's possible that a child with minimal disruption in their lives could be negatively impacted to a greater degree compared to another child whose life has been turned upside down. It's also true that a child can seemingly be okay right now, but start to show symptoms months after their lives resume normalcy. This is called trauma shock, and it's very common. Next slide. So let's talk about what this looks like in real life situations. I want to provide examples of the children I'm seeing and how very different it's playing out in each of their lives. The names and details have obviously been changed to protect identities and confidentiality, but let me introduce you to Michael and Jonathan, who are both honor roll high school students, both involved in sports and student council. Michael's parents are divorced, good relationship with dad, conflictual relationship with mom. His grandmother and father both contracted the virus, but the grandmother was the only one who had to be hospitalized. Both parents are on the same page regarding stay-at-home orders, and he's not left the house since the beginning of the pandemic. The divorce has made Michael's ACE score a 1. Jonathan lives with both of his parents and reports a typical teenage relationship with both of them. He doesn't know anyone who's been diagnosed with the disease, and his ACE score is 0. His parents have allowed him to get together with friends, and he's taken full advantage of that. Both boys have been spending hours connecting through social media platforms and are looking forward to summer activities, hoping social distancing will be lifted. Between these two children, who would you say is likely to both be impacted by the current situation? Well, both boys are currently in treatment. Jonathan is exhibiting acute stress symptoms and has verbalized thoughts of suicide. He experienced a sports injury 3 years ago with several emergency surgeries and was rendered blind in one eye. Today's circumstances are triggering those previous traumas, and he reports a belief that he can't continue to live like this anymore. Parents are obviously concerned, but are also baffled by the severity of his current symptoms. They report he's always been go with the flow kind of kid and didn't even seem fazed by this injury. This is his first time in treatment. Michael is presenting symptoms of anxiety and depression stemming from issues related to attachment. Father always worked a lot and was often out of town when he was an infant. Mother experienced medical issues throughout his childhood and was often preoccupied emotionally. Early on, Michael assumed a caregiver role and felt like it was his duty to emotionally care for mom. Today's pandemic is triggering his perception of abandonment, and he's verbalizing fears that he's going to catch the virus and die. His family's anxious demeanors are also reinforcing the fear, but it should be noticed that mom has reason to be nervous due to her compromised immune system and other variables. Michael's first trauma was likely the inconsistent support received by mom during her illness, despite the loving efforts of family and friends. The second trauma incident was abandonment during parents' divorce, and he didn't receive any counseling at that time. So let's go on to the next slide and on to another example. Christine is 12 and Tamika is 9. They're middle schoolers with average grades. Neither participate in school activities, but they're viewed as popular amongst their peers. Christine lives with maternal grandmother and has no contact with parents. Because of her asthma, she's not left the home since, she's not left the home since social distancing began. Her older sister contracted the virus, but recovered without complications. Christine's ACE score is 5 as she experienced neglect and verbal abuse while her parents were using substances, and her father is currently in prison. Tamika has lived with single mother since father completed suicide while she was an infant. She doesn't know anybody who's had the virus, but she's adamant about staying home. Her ACE score is 5 due to family member's suicide, mother's diagnosed mental illness and substance abuse, and resulting verbal abuse with neglect. Based on what we've reviewed during this webinar, one could assume that both children would have difficulty dealing with our current situation due to the developmental trauma that they've both experienced. Well, let's take a look. Christine is entering treatment for the first time because she's really nervous about catching the virus. Her friend told her therapy helps, and then she referred her to me. This case specifically highlights the fascinating power of the brain to heal itself, given the opportunity. Christine was fortunate to have developed a secure attachment with grandmother since birth. During the years of abuse, she was able to consistently seek solace from grandma and her older sister. And I saved the best for last. These stories are actually what keep me going during difficult times, and thankfully there are many others like it. Tamika began treatment with me while mom started her recovery 2 years ago. Through motivation and commitment, Tamika was able to process through her previous traumas and is not currently experiencing any symptoms. As a matter of fact, we've been working on termination for the past 6 weeks, while others have been near crisis. Next slide, please. So it truly does take a village to raise a child. It doesn't matter the role you play in the lives of children, even if it seems insignificant. They can never have enough love, support, and healthy attachment. For kids that I work with, one of our goals for treatment is always building a strong support system. They learn how to identify and meet their own needs. And if a child only has one person to whom they can turn to, their emotional tank is rarely full. Parents have a multitude of responsibilities that often make them unavailable for their children. This is life, and this is okay. Encouraging children to seek support from others strengthens their autonomy and lightens our load. So remember, as parents and caregivers, we can't do it all of the time. That being said, let's talk about things that we can do. First, empathic listening. Children, and adults for that matter, feel supported when feeling heard. You can demonstrate empathy by listening and not talking. Wait until the child is finished with what they have to say, and then provide input. If they're looking for input. As humans, we are driven to find solutions. Oftentimes, children don't want solutions, and they just want us to know how they're feeling. This can bring them more comfort at times than hearing your thoughts on how they can fix things. From here, they can develop their own solutions and rely on you for support. Next, validate the impact of their experiences. As you know, everyone can have different perceptions of the same event. Sometimes we say things like, oh, you shouldn't feel that way. As I was practicing this webinar with my family, my youngest son piped up and said, ugh, I hate when people say that. What we really usually mean to say is, I wish you didn't feel this way. So instead, let your child know you understand how they're feeling by saying things like, I'm sorry this is bothering you so much, or I hear how upset you are and I feel bad about that. Normalizing children's emotions help them understand that they're not alone. Letting them know that lots of other people have the same feelings that they are, even when you don't particularly feel that way. This also allows them to know it's okay to have different feelings than their parents. I encourage those looking for more of these types of tips. Like Pam said, Google parenting during COVID, and you'll find a huge variety of videos with just this information. Remember, be aware that old traumas may be triggered during these times, and children may bring up situations that haven't been spoken about in years. Same principle applies. Listen, validate, normalize, and offer for them to see someone that may be able to help them sort through all of those feelings. Children don't have to be experiencing severe symptoms for therapy to be helpful. Last year, my then 15-year-old asked if he could see his brother's therapist. I was curious as why he felt he needed this, because as you can imagine, the hazards of having a therapist for a mother is that you're often pretty in touch with thoughts and feelings. He responded to my curiosity by saying, Mom, there's just some things I don't feel comfortable discussing with you because I don't want you to have a different idea of me. I was like dying to explore this statement further, but instead I took my mom hat off, put my therapist cap on, and said, I can totally understand you not wanting me to look at you differently. I'm happy you were able to come to me and ask to schedule the appointment. I want to remind you that it's okay that we have different thoughts and ideas. I may not always agree with your beliefs, but I always love you for who you are. Nothing is too small to benefit from therapy, so don't hesitate to offer those services, because remember, children can only benefit from stronger support systems. Next slide. Many prominent figures in the field of mental health suggest limbic system or brain-based therapies as most effective for recovering from trauma. As an individual therapist, I've experienced many people gain life-changing clarity and relief from symptoms that have plagued them for years. I'd like to give you my take on why I've been fortunate enough to witness such change. As I said early on, I specialize in brain spotting therapy, for which I attribute most of my clients' successes. Brain spotting is based on the idea that where you look affects how you feel. As a client focuses on a stressful experience, the therapist assists them in locating an eye position that is connected to a brain spot by challenging experiences. By maintaining this focus throughout the session, the brain is enabled to release and process that challenging experience. After the person's brain has restabilized and rebooted during that brain spotting session, cognitive therapies are more easily utilized to help change problematic behaviors. Once those behaviors start to change, dialectical behaviors then are beneficial to help with emotional regulation and improve interpersonal relationships. Most of the clients I've worked with report after brain spotting feeling more at peace and recognize daily life as a little bit easier. I'm going to end on that note and let you all know I appreciate your time and your interest in this material. I really enjoyed presenting for you today, and now I'm going to toss it back to Angela to tie it up for us.
Great. Thanks so much, Stephanie. That was really interesting information, and I know we have some questions, so I'll give those to you now. I have one from a grandparent who said that during this pandemic, there's been limited time with grandchildren because of both online schooling and distance. So what are some positive steps that can be taken so the conversation with the children itself isn't more depressing for them than it could be?
Can you say the last part of that again?
Sure. So what are some positive steps that this grandparent can take to make the conversations not depressing with their grandchildren?
That's a good question, especially if the grandparents are feeling depressed themselves, or if just the child is feeling depressed. So I think just after validating that specific thing is specific, the validation is key first, and then maybe just going into trying to change the subject. And so tell me about what you did today. Tell me about what your plans are for tomorrow, and trying to engage them in different communication and steer them away from that. If they continue to bring it back to the depressing things, just kind of listen and maybe ask, is there anything that I can do to help? A lot of times I find myself and parents that I'm dealing with feel like we need to give the child something to fix or to take away the depression. And like I said earlier, a lot of times we can't do that. We can't take that away, but they usually feel better afterwards just having the discussion.
Great, thank you. And Pam, this question is actually geared to you. Just Pam, you mentioned some recommendations for activities to help reduce anxiety. You also addressed the need for hope. Can you expand on these?
Sure, thank you. We started a series, every morning we have a series called Rise with Hope. It's a 10-15 minute live Facebook segment that shares self-care practices. So what I really was referencing there is, the hope in this is to try to stay rooted in the moment, implement some of the more traditional recovery skills that people in recovery exercise on a regular basis. So introducing some deep breathing exercises, looking up meditation that you can do with your children. I'm sure there are other opportunities, so I don't want to self-promote, but we also have arts and crafts activities on on Saturday mornings for families to do. We've made Mother's Day crafts and Easter crafts. So I think it's about getting involved and trying really hard to practice things that can help keep you in the moment and not projecting into the future or catastrophizing some of the fears that you might be living with. So that's what I was referring to there. And the hope really is that within being home and having more time, it is looking for a meaning for that, a deeper meaning. Like there's two sides to every coin. So we can look at what's really challenging through this time, but we can also spend some time with our kids making a list of what we're grateful for, what opportunities have emerged through this that are positive, like what are some of the differences that we like about this, and reminding them to do maybe a daily gratitude list. Every day, look to do one thing that they maybe couldn't have done if they were not living through this pandemic. So that's really what I was referring to be challenging yourself to look for the silver lining or the upside, and to also take this opportunity to do some whole family self-care activities like family gratitude lists, like meditation, like arts and crafts, things that can take you out of the stress and out of the downtime and into sort of an active activity that keeps you in the moment.
Thanks, Pam, for sharing that. Mm-hmm. And I just want to add that the activities that you mentioned, as well as so many other activities that other agencies and organizations are making available, is available on the Partnership for Drug-Free New Jersey website. We maintain a calendar of events that are virtual events that are happening around the state in the prevention, treatment, and recovery communities. It's available at drugfreenj.org. It's today, NJ, and we'll share that information in the chat feature for all of you to review, and that includes the events that Pam mentioned that Hope Sheds Light is holding on Saturday mornings and the different activities. We have another question. Moving on from that. What are the symptoms of trauma, Stephanie, that I should be looking for in my child?
So symptoms are typically, I think I want to clarify, if you know that a traumatic event happened, how would they respond to that? Or if you don't know something, and am I looking at those symptoms and assuming that a trauma did happen? Is there any way that we could clarify that?
No, I think that we're just talking about the trauma of this pandemic and the stress and what are some symptoms that they should be aware of.
Oh, okay. So depressive symptoms, if they're changing their mood. So first, any types of changes in their behavior that are drastic. They are going to, most people in difficult times are going to change their personality, maybe a little bit less happy, a little more sad. But if those things continue and consistently get worse, a depressed mood that then kind of they start talking about being better off dead, if they're spending a lot of time in their room, if they want to talk about things over and over and over again as if they need like excessive reinforcement that things are going to be okay, might indicate that they are not feeling safe. Sometimes if altered the way that they're looking, their hygiene will start to decline, not taking a shower as much. That one, could be just because we're sitting around and not feeling like we have to go out. So that one you just kind of really want to keep an eye on. Being startled by things, if they're feeling like hypervigilant, wanting to check different things all of the time. Is the door checked? Is the door locked? Feeling like that they're not always safe. Those types of things.
All right, great. Before I go to the next question, which I think adds to kind of what you're discussing, I know we've been getting a lot of questions about where this presentation or a recording of this presentation will be available. And I just want to mention that it'll be available at the website knockoutopdabuse.drugfreenj.org. So we'll share that as well into the chat feature. But going into the next question, and I think this might be for both of you, Pam and Stephanie. The question is, my high school age child is having a hard time with social distancing as it has led to social isolation for her. Can you share some ideas to decrease that social isolation? And also, what should I be looking for as these social distancing regulations come to an end and my child is reintroduced to her friends and the environment?
So I guess I could start off by saying I think that that's really going to depend on the person who's asking the question on how they feel about the social distancing. So we all have different thoughts of where we should be right now, what rules we should be following, how fearful we are of the virus. So I think that you really have to stay true to how you're feeling, but then also asking the child what their worries are. If they're not feeling, so worried about going out, then allow them to do what is safe, kind of reinforcing what is expected, but also recognizing that once they do start going out, depending on obviously the age, that we're not going to be always on top of them, and to kind of keep on top of them and making sure that they have to do this, they have to do that, because that's more of our fear that can kind of incite more anxiety on their end. But as far as right now, I would encourage the Zoom type groups to get together, and sometimes if they're feeling a little more depressed, they don't want to engage in that, or they say, yeah, I'll take care of that later on, or maybe I'll do that this weekend. If you have time as the parent or caregiver, then maybe, hey, let's sit down and invite your friends to a Zoom party this weekend, and maybe kind of going around an activity of planning a little party on Zoom or whatever type of social app, and have a theme and get them involved in coming up with that. Also doing social distancing, getting together with fire pit. If the parent again is comfortable with doing that, you can social distance, be across the street from any neighbors that are around, things like that.
Great. And Pam, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with obviously all of that. I think I would add that in terms of the isolation, you might want to consider some sort of civic activities, doing some kind of food collection for distribution, maybe something else. I'm sort of struggling with another example, but I know just staying connected to the community and being a part of the solution again, and offering some way for it, having your children come up with ways that they either as a group, their class maybe as a group, or their group of friends, or individually can start to give back to the community and support helping others, I believe can really help with the isolation, and that, moving away from some of the pain and anxiety that's they're maybe experiencing. And also to just look for creative arts and art activities online. I feel that emotional expression through art, music, and even performing arts provides a platform and opportunity again to kind of get some of your feelings out in a nonverbal way, because sometimes you can't really put your finger on words that can express exactly how you're feeling, and consistent with what Stephanie was saying, that sometimes there really isn't an answer in the moment. There's just this need to get it out. So I know there are some open mic sessions that are taking place. We have some creative arts opportunities. I've been getting emails about online music festivals. So I would look for some performing and creative arts activities and civic engagement.
Okay, and so I just want to just add on to what you said with some other questions that we received. The idea, Pam, of what you said of letting your child take the lead. We have a question about how to address a preteen on that. And then we also have a question that says that my daughter is a senior whose school just decided on virtual graduation. She's also celebrating her 18th birthday coming up on that day that was supposed to be her prom. I'm trying to come up with special things for her to do to celebrate both her birthday and graduation, but she is rejecting them and saying none of it will replace what she is losing. Should I just follow her lead, or should I persist in showing her ways to celebrate and try to find a positive?
Is that a me question? Is that a Pam question?
I think it would probably be for both you and Stephanie.
Yeah, and I'm hoping Stephanie can chime in from a clinical perspective. I think for me, I go back to her, what I was referring to earlier, sort of this going back and forth through the different stages of grief over a significant loss. She's losing the opportunity to have a typical 18th birthday party and typical graduation that she's waited a long time and worked really hard and has looked forward to. So she's back in sort of the denial stage right now of acceptance, that she doesn't want to accept that she has to come up with an alternative way to celebrate. So I just know from my personal experience to confront that head on might not be the best strategy. Hopefully Stephanie can come up with some strategies, but I feel like, understanding where your child is at least and meeting them where they are is the first step. And then I'm going to toss it to Stephanie for some more clinical, comments.
Yeah, Pam, I think it's crucial what you said is meeting the child where they are. And so I think you do a combination of both of those things. You really hear where they are and validate that this really does stink. And that keep trying to come up with certain things is great if they're wanting to come up with those things. But I think maybe at that time they're not wanting to, and they're telling you, they're verbalizing that they don't want to, that it won't replace that. And then you can validate that it won't replace it, but it's going to be and it's going to be something different. And then you can always just leave it at that. Well, I hear what you're saying right now is that you don't want to address it, but there might be a time that you will want to address it. Come talk to me if you need my help doing that. And sometimes they just need to process through things on their own and get to there. And then they might be able to come back or go back again later on. Hey, given any thought to that, do you think that you would want to come up with something else, or would you like to do something different to replace it? Hopefully that's helpful.
No, I think it is. I think we'll take one more question and then we'll just close up a little bit with some additional information, and then we'll stay on the line to answer some additional questions that we haven't gotten to yet. And the question that we have, Stephanie, for you, is virtual therapy as effective as in-person sessions?
That's a sticky one. So I don't know that there's not a right answer. I come from the spot of that there is no right answer, because some people it works for, some people it doesn't. Some therapists enjoy it and are going to stay that way. Some people don't. The thing that I'm really concerned about with is if you begin therapy virtually, then the therapist doesn't really get to know the person. But that's, again, my personal preference. I like to get in there and be and see the body language and see all of that you can't really see on virtual. That being said, it's better than nothing. So I've noticed a lot of clients that when we closed down our office, I offered them telehealth, and they said, yeah, not really feeling it, which I get. But then, and checking in after a while, they said, yeah, I'm going to take it because it's better than nothing. So if you're going to end therapy, not to do telehealth, I would suggest not doing that. Just kind of deal with it during the telehealth. If you're trying to get into therapy and starting on telehealth and then moving to in the face, that's okay too. My preference is I like in-person better, but it's different. It's not going to be, I can't say that it's better or not. And then in the talking about brain spotting, the type of brain-based therapy, you can absolutely do it on telehealth and have been doing it and having very different mixed results of some are great, some not so looking like it's really significant, but then turns out ending up being really great later on. So I know that probably doesn't really give you a concrete answer, but that's really my thought and take on it.
No, well, thank you for your perspective on that. So as everyone will see on their screen, there's a participant evaluation form, survey. If you could complete that, we would appreciate it. I want to thank you, Stephanie, once again for sharing your expertise today. And also thank you again, Pam, and the entire Hope Sheds Light team and community for collaborating with us on this webinar. I also want to thank all of you who signed on today for joining this conversation to knock out opioid abuse. And I invite you to join us once again on May 28th for our next webinar, COVID-19, Behavioral Health and Addiction. You can find information on that webinar at knockoutopioidabuse.drugfreenj.org. The Partnership for Drug Free New Jersey and the Horizon Foundation for New Jersey will be continuing to provide resources on the website knockoutopioidabuse.drugfreenj.org. And you can visit that site to learn more about upcoming webinars and other programs that are offered to help fight the opioid crisis. The slides from today's presentation will be available on that website, as well as the recording. And we'll be following up with each of you with a list of resources and additional survey that you can complete. I want to thank you again for committing to be part of the solution to address New Jersey's opioid crisis. I want to thank Philomena again for joining us, and on behalf of Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey and the Partnership for a Drug Free New Jersey, we wish you continued good health. Be well, and we will continue with some questions now that we haven't been able to get to yet. So Stephanie, can you tell us if there is an age-appropriate time to talk to my kids about issues like COVID-19 and also about drug abuse, marijuana, opioids, alcohol?
Mm-hmm. So you should be open with them, and I want to clarify that with age appropriate, so things that they can understand. If you hide things and don't let them know that there's something going on, then that often will have a more frightening effect, or them feeling like that it should be more scarier than we think for younger children. So things like in the younger age, yes, people are getting sick and we're staying home so that we can't, so that we don't get sick, and really leaving it at that for the younger ages. And then going with their lead. If they ask more questions, answer as simply and as age appropriate as you can without putting in more information that they're really asking about. Typically that younger age will just ask one or two questions and then they're on to the next subject. With older kids, I think that it's important to give, so many of us have our own personal biases and feelings about it, but there's also a lot of other feelings and emotions about it as well. So sharing that there's different aspects and different people feel differently, instead of maybe always imparting your view on the child that it's this dangerous, if I feel it's this dangerous, allowing the child to then putting all of the information out there and all of the different viewpoints, and then allowing them to see where they fall in it. And the other one with substance abuse and alcohol and that type of stuff, where I come from, I believe that it's best to start talking, again, age appropriate, about that as soon as they can understand. They start DARE in school and that education in intermediate schools. So age appropriate stuff, having those conversations as early as possible.
All right, thank you so much. And I also want to mention that the Partnership for a Drug Free New Jersey offers a 1 hour webinar, the 15-minute child break. It's a free program that's available for any groups of parents, grandparents, caregivers, and really talks about that age-appropriate time to have the conversation about drugs and alcohol, the importance of communication, what we should talk about. We offer it as a webinar and as a pre-recorded webinar for your group. So we'll put some information up in the chat feature so you can get that and bring that to your community if it's something that you're interested in. Another question that we have is, my child is overwhelmed with schoolwork. It seems to be adding to the stress of the situation in general and the stress of the COVID pandemic. Any suggestions on how I can prevent him from making unhealthy choices to deal with that stress?
I guess if talking about how much the school work is, if it's different than before, what about it is really overwhelming him at this point? So he might be saying it's school, but if we start to look a little bit deeper and do that exploring, it's very easy for someone to say, oh, well, I'm tired, that's why I'm acting this way. Because when somebody says, are you okay? A lot of times you don't want to talk about it. So you just put one of those catchphrases out there, and hopefully you're hoping that the other person will kind of detract from it and leave you alone and not pull you into conversation. So sometimes you want to dig a little bit deeper and find out, is it really the schoolwork? What about the schoolwork? Is it more? Is it different expectations that you're putting on yourself? Is it something that the other kids are talking about, that they're doing, that you're not doing? So really exploring what the underlying factors may be, and then also talking about productive problem-solving things of how you could do it differently, instead of we can deal with it this way by smoking a joint, but what's it going to look like afterwards? Is it going to feel worse, or is it not going to feel worse? How do you deal with those things? So really kind of talking about both scenarios and then allowing them to weigh their pros and cons. So if you use an unhealthy coping skill, what does that look like afterwards? And how does that feel compared to the feeling that you're having right now? And I use a lot of times the view of a scale. Let's put this on the scale, and the feeling that you're having now, does that outweigh the feeling of the consequences later on, and how long do those feelings go?
Angela, for a second.
Thank you. Go ahead, Pam.
Yeah, I just want to add to that, just to say it might be a great opportunity to start to talk about and help your child identify techniques for self-management. So adding to what Stephanie said and having that very important discussion, then saying, hey, would you like to try, a new workout video or something, like let's go through our options. There's so many online. Do you want to take a guitar lesson, something like allowing them to make a connection then to, it's not just about playing a guitar, it's about a skill that you can develop to manage stress when you're feeling it. So I would just add that active step, an action step to everything that Stephanie just said.
All right, great. And Pam, actually, we just got another question for you. If you could just share again where the Daily Rise with Hope is located for someone who wants to catch that.
That's on our Facebook page. Just, Hope Sheds Light. Just look us up on Facebook. It's every morning at 9. There are 7 different volunteers, myself included, that take a day of the week and share our personal self-care practices and just what we're doing to navigate our way through the COVID-19.
Great, and I know we're going to be sharing that information also in the chat feature for everyone. And just had another suggestion about, really having the conversation with the school for the person who asked the question about how do you balance that school, home, COVID stress. And that was one of the suggestions. I think we have just one last question, and I'll leave it to both of you to determine. If there's one thing that I should do to help reduce my child's anxiety and prevent substance use or use of opioids to self-medicate while we continue to worry about COVID-19, what would be the one most important thing that you would recommend?
You want me to go first, Stephanie?
Sure.
I think obviously there are so many factors to consider, but just if I had to say one thing, I would help my children practice how to stay in the moment in their thinking, and to give them, practice with them skills to do that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that that's a good point. I think the distraction techniques are really important, and letting them know that the emotions are temporary. They come and they go. Sometimes they stay a lot longer, but if you can get distracted during the time that it's feeling so bad, you'll look back and say, oh, now it's gone. So I think distraction to get through that immediate time when somebody is usually looking for something to take that horrible feeling away at that moment.
You know, I will just say one final thing on that also is, you know, when we're in recovery, oftentimes we have to replace, you know, we have to learn new behaviors to replace some of the experiences or behaviors that we developed during active addiction. If we can work with our kids now before they're drug using and teach them that they have everything they need internally to develop skills to help them cope with all sorts of emotions and situations, we won't have to reteach them later on.
Great point, Pam.
Great. And again, I want to thank the two of you for your expertise and for sharing with us today. I want to thank all of you who, so many of you are still on, and appreciate you spending the extra time with us to get this information. Again, I just want to mention that the recording of this webinar will be available later today at knockoutopioidabuse.drugfreemj.org, as well as other resources and other program information. We'll also be sending a follow-up email. Again, thanks so much for joining us and for joining the conversation to prevent opiate abuse here in New Jersey. Have a good day, everyone. Be well.